Okay, I believe we are live. Hello, Bezod.
Hello. See if my
How
camera
are
will focus
you?
again. I'm good aside from my camera going out of focus.
It's okay. Um, Welcome back to UXR Conversations. This is now episode number 3, and very happy to be here with you today. I am Noam Siegel, Director of User Research at Wellfront, and currently on parental leave and not working. And together with me today, having a fun conversation, is Bezod Sajani, Head of Research and Analytics Operations at Slack.
That was
So
neat.
I know, right? Welcome to the show. I
Thanks.
even have a banner about our topic today, which is democratizing research. But before we get to that, I wanted to ask you a couple of things. Can we start just a bit with your journey to where you are today to research? I noticed that your bachelor's degree is in rhetoric and media studies. Why did you choose that subject?
Yes, this is a fun story. So, being a naive college senior, I had a plan for what I was going to study in college. I was going to double major in psych and economics, and I wanted to work in organizational psych and sort of help organizations be more effective. And I sort of ended up there, strangely enough. But my freshman year, I took a class on new media and technology from someone who would become my undergraduate advisor. And this was 2007, so Twitter had just gone live. Tumblr was big at the time. Facebook had just expanded outside of colleges. And as someone who had a lot of family overseas and had grown up living in different places, I was really fascinated by the role that media and technology played in connecting people and sort of the way that different media channels encouraged and enabled different kinds of connections. And so my freshman year, we were studying everything from kind of historical Baudrillard, like simulation, simulacra, Lev Manovich, and like new media and sort of disruptive media, all the way up to even just like Twitter and kind of the public square. And so Professor Cordova was a Puerto Rican American that studied the way that public discourse changed when the public square went from being a physical space in his native Puerto Rico to kind of an online place, and whose voices were hindered or amplified, and the role that pseudonymity, anonymity, and kind of being public played in communication. And I was fascinated by all those things, but even more so on a kind of interpersonal level. And so we worked towards almost like a self-created degree program in what we were calling media aesthetics, which I think like now we would talk about in terms of interface, like UI and user experience and whatnot, and really looking at the way that specifically defaults shaped the conversations that happen. So back then, Facebook used to ask like, "What's your favorite movie? What's your favorite book? What's your favorite, etc." And that dictated and sort of led a lot of the discussions that would happen early on Facebook, because you were asked to present yourself in a certain way, and that was like fascinating to me. But when you get an undergrad degree in rhetoric, you have lots of theoretical skills and very little practical skills to do anything. And so I knew I wanted to go to grad school and learn kind of how to apply that theoretical framing and foundation to the products and services that I was using, but I didn't have a good way of doing that. And so I ended up going to the University of Washington to the program, get a master's in human-centered design and engineering, which was, I think, honestly, like the best blend of anthropology, sociology, comm, design, CS, and art. And we really thought deeply about like what was the role and interplay between humans and technology, and how did the way that we use tools shape us, and the way that tools, like how do humans shape the tools they use, and tools shape the humans that use them. And that, I think, gave me a lot of an understanding of kind of qualitative research methods, quantitative research methods. And in doing that, I was lucky to work with two different faculty members, one who studied sort of, don't even know, I can't do justice to Beth's work, but she looked at how people would become experts through functional expertise rather than credentialized expertise. And so that introduced me to participatory design and peer-based learning. And then on the other side, I worked with a woman, Professor Charlotte Lee, who studied kind of the large-scale collaborations. So what's like the work of work? And looking at those things together, I just became fascinated with understanding how people use tools and how we could make those tools better, and learned a lot of kind of foundations for doing research to have a position and a perspective on that, and then in theory apply that to change those tools in some way.
I can see how that would lead you to what you're up to today. I have to ask you, I mean, that program at UW has churned out countless incredible researchers and research professionals. What is it about that program? You know, can you think of anything specific, or is it?
Yeah, I feel super fortunate because we actually, when I got in, I think I was one of the only, there was a brief period of time where they let people into the master's program that were not in like a professional master's. So I'd come straight from undergrad. I had no real work experience. But the program had roots in technical writing. And I think that understanding of like, you are going to design and build things for people who are not yourselves. And there's a level of kind of acknowledging that there is that gap and figuring out how to close that gap, as the program evolved and as technology evolved, took on just a much broader perspective. And they very intentionally hired faculty from very different disciplines who had a desire to critically interrogate the way that people and technology intersected. And so we had people, I mean, currently like Professor Kate Starbird, who studies misinformation and has done a ton of work on crisis online and Twitter. Professor Lee continues to do work understanding how large groups collaborate. There's people who are even more in sort of the computer science focus of like understanding how to build systems that have certain perspectives in there. And I think the diversity of the faculty and the kind of starting with the understanding that artifacts have politics and our own thoughts and biases are embedded into all of the things that we build. And so we need to be critical about understanding ourselves so that we can be critical about understanding what we're building, has just led to a very strong like core for a lot of people to come into our field. And so I think that you've seen lots of people come out of those programs, even at the undergrad level, who are now
Absolutely.
like practicing professionals that are incredible researchers because they come from that place and they are willing to make that sort of critical investigation of themselves and their companies and their products, which I think is not always taught or learned as much if you come into the field as an industrial professional and like, unfortunately don't have maybe some of that orientation or academic context.
Yeah. Well, shout out to everyone from UW and definitely recommend that program for those aspiring to get into the research profession.
Yes.
Let's jump into the core topic of today, which again, is democratizing research. Can you start by telling me what that even means to you? What does democratizing research mean in your perspective?
Yeah. Very, very, I think, related to the conversation we were just having. I think that humans are innately curious, and everyone in some way, shape, or form is doing research in their day-to-day life, right? You're trying to understand what to make for dinner. So you're going to look up recipes and figure out, hey, what kinds of foods are involved in making this thing? Are those things I like or don't like? Where do I want to go for dinner? And I think that one of the things that's interesting about our profession is you have kind of these two ends of the spectrum. One, which is the very academic perspective that there is a specific way to do science, and that curiosity with rigor has certain bounds and expectations. And I think that's a completely valid perspective. The other end of the spectrum is the reality that people have been building things since the dawn of time without researchers at their company, or without people who are full-time dedicated to the act of just doing research. And that research is a part of building. And I think many of us have been privileged to be able to spend 100% of our time at a company doing research, which is new to some extent. And so I think to me, this idea of democratizing research is acknowledging where you can kind of converge or sit somewhere between those two ends of the spectrum, acknowledge what are the types of rigorous curiosity that require special skills that researchers themselves need to be trained on to do themselves, and what are the types of research activities that you can actually build and build sort of guidelines and process for, and then help enable and empower other people to take on. And so I think about, just even at Slack, all of the different people I work with, there are a handful of roles that regularly talk to customers and gather feedback and use that feedback to inform decisions, which, at the 10,000 foot view is the research process. And so for me, democratizing research is a lot about asking, like, where can I take the skills and the abilities and the perspectives that I have and use it to amplify and enable and empower the people around me who are doing similar things to do those things better and more rigorously, without totally blowing up their process or creating unnecessary complexity, or really telling them that what they're doing is wrong, because they're going to do those things with or without me. And so the thought is, like, how can I take all of the special skills and perspectives that we have, protect the people who we're building for, but help the people around us do their jobs better.
And it feels like you're starting to touch upon this, but on your LinkedIn and elsewhere, it says democratizing and scaling research. What's the relationship between the democratizing piece and the scaling piece?
Yeah, and this is it's a good question. And I think it's something that not every company buys both pieces of, but I think they're very important and interrelated. I and the research team at Slack, like, physically cannot be in every customer conversation. That's impossible. We have 200 plus people that work on the sales team and the customer success team, and they're talking to customers all the time. So if you try to enable other people to do research, but only if you're in the room or if you're guiding them, like, you then become a bottleneck, right? And so you actually have to have a perspective of, I am going to give away this part of my process, or I'm going to enable these people to do this on their own, because it's much easier for me to teach 200 people how to have, rigorous, effective interviews and gather data in a way that's not biased and doesn't lead them to do false generalizations, than it is to try to be in a room with 200 customers all the time. Excuse me. And so when I think about the scaling piece, I think about really that split of, what are the things that I have to do because I am a researcher and I have certain expertise, and that expertise is going to take much too long to teach someone else, or is not core to their job, versus what are the things that I can enable them to do better and more rigorously, that they will then become more successful. And I think having a perspective of, like, every customer conversation is going to be ours, or we're going to be in the room is actually going to hurt you both as a team and in your career, because it's just not possible, right? People were having customer conversations before you, they were gathering data before you, they're going to be doing those things after. And I think if we're all being really honest with ourselves, I don't want to be in every customer conversation. Like, I would much rather work on a bunch of other things than sit in every meeting that my company is having. And so I think you have to have both of those perspectives. You have to have I'm going to teach you to be great and successful on your own, and I'm just not going to be in all of those activities, because that's how those things grow.
Yeah. And we'll dive a bit more deeply into the mechanics a bit later. I did want to ask you if kind of you can play devil's advocate for yourself a bit, or just answer this. Is there a case to be made against democratizing research in your mind? Or is this just something obvious that we should all be doing in our organizations?
I think there are lots of concerns that you should have as a researcher, and that at a company and an industry level, there are questions that you need to answer and certain barriers that you need to put up to protect your customers. I think one thing that we all need to remember is no one exists to give us product feedback. Like, no one is just walking around thinking about, oh, I would love to tell Slack that this is terrible, and I can't wait for them to email me and ask me to set up time with it. Like, that's not true. And there are certain products that we build, especially I think people who work in government, where you want to be really sensitive to your customers. And everyone should have a certain level of discipline and consideration that goes into reaching out to a customer, because all research has a cost. It has a cost to you, it has a cost to your team, it has a cost to that person. And you want to do research that is going to be a value exchange, that is not value extractive from them. And so I think that like one of the biggest concerns that comes up when we talk about democratizing research is this idea that like, oh, I'm just gonna like turn over a list of customers and then everyone in the company can talk to them. And without certain checks and balances, that's a terrible idea. But I do think if you zoom out, there are lots of conversations that could be had, lots of ways that customers and teams can interact that are going to be better if more people are equipped to do that. And I think that it helps people understand the practice that we are a part of and the work that we do, and understand, hey, here are actually things that are really excellent for the research team to take on because they are special. I think that a lot of people talk about democratizing research and they think of like, I'm just gonna, give everyone a usertesting.com account, or I'm gonna, just put out a discussion guide and then everyone can use it. Like, that's definitely not what I'm talking about. I think that we need to be very protective of our customers and their time and be sensitive to those things. And there are certain protected populations. But I think if you start with, I'm gonna protect my customers, and then your next step is, where are some of the things that my team or my company needs that maybe I can empower them to do rather than do myself, you start to work towards a better place and a better balance of your activities versus kind of scaled and democratized activities.
Yeah. So I want to jump into the mechanics, kind of the key ingredients of a democratized research practice, and also just your day-to-day. But before that, we have a question from an Alec Levine, a mutual friend of ours, co-founder of the UXR Collective and UXR Conf. Hello, Alec. He is asking, oh, and by the way, the right time to ask questions is any time. So please keep the questions coming if you're watching this live, or feel free to tweet at us or email either myself or Bezod later if you have additional questions. So the question Alec is asking is, who are your biggest research advocates outside of the research team? What's your answer to that?
That's an excellent question. I think at Slack, we have a few, and I would say that Slack is actually an incredibly human company, and people are, because we build a product that is around your work, we are very aware of the disruption that comes to like asking you to spend time, talking to us, or any product change that we make is going to be an actual disruption into your work. And so I think people are very cautious about that in general. And while some companies have a like ship first and iterate later, we definitely take the approach of like, let's really make sure that this is being well thought out and we're putting our best foot forward when things launch. And in that regard, I think that the customer experience team that Ali Rail runs, basically what a lot of companies call support, is an incredible group of advocates for us, because they deal with thousands of customers, I think daily, support tickets, various issues. And they are just an incredible barometer of where things are going well or not going well in the product. They own our help center. They own a lot of different surfaces. And so they've been really great partners to us, both in flagging things that may seem like outliers or small issues, but then can become bigger trends, and asking us to kind of leverage our own expertise to make their processes better. So one of the things we've been doing a lot of right now is just being available for our customers in the time of kind of COVID-19. And as a result, we're like asking people who are doing that for feedback, and like, what was the most helpful thing that you've given to the customer, and that kind of thing. And we worked really closely with them to actually say, here, these are the right kinds of questions for us to ask, so that you can, help empower those people who are on the front lines, have the right kinds of conversations. Another really good group is our customer success team. So it's like the accounts team that works with folks once they've signed on and are paying for Slack in some way. And they've been great partners in a lot of regards, one of which was myself, Nicole Zhang, and Chuck Kwong actually worked with a few people on their team to build out survey templates for them in Qualtrics. And we've trained them on Qualtrics because we realized that they were sending a bunch of different surveys to customers at important moments in their life cycle before they do training after Slack has launched to understand like where they can do things better. But as you would imagine, the same kind of question asked in different wording, the same question being asked with different scales or different response types. And so we spent a few months just saying, okay, what are all these different touch points? What are the things that you're trying to do where we can sprinkle some kind of research expertise in, centralize these things, make them a bit more rigorous, and then train you all on how to use Qualtrics so that instead of using a bunch of different tools or whatnot, you have kind of a standard comparable way to do this across the company. And actually, we're working with them now on interview training because a lot of them do discovery interviews prior to rolling out Slack for a certain department or across the company. And many of them are excellent at having these customer conversations, but they want to know, how do I ask better follow-up questions, or how am I a little bit less leading? And that's a great place for us to collaborate because they're not asking for us to come in and be in all those conversations and do their job. They're just saying, you have a perspective or a type of expertise that would benefit us. Can we work together so that you can help us be better? And that's been a great collaboration.
So you've started to touch upon this, but what are some of the other key ingredients of your day-to-day, of a democratized research practice, some things you can share? You started with the Qualtrics stuff, the interview training. What else is going on right now which kind of reflects what you aim to achieve with a fully democratized practice?
Yes. I think some of the most important things are reflecting as a team on what are the things that you're willing to own and what are the things that you want to empower or enable. And so there are certain types of research projects that we ourselves are going to do, and kind of regardless of where there's a need across the company, whether it comes from Stuart, our CEO, whether it comes from a product team, where there's someone in research is going to be the primary owner and driver of that. I think the other end of things is at a very foundational level, understanding how we want to protect our customers, how we want to track who's been involved in research, and how we want to respect their time. And so things like how we keep track of who is invited to participate in research, having a cool-off period, having rules of engagement so that maybe someone on the accounts team can actually reach out to their own account however much they want because they're serving that customer and they have a different relationship than we do as sort of a research team. But I think setting up those kind of ground rules are really important, and then making them explicit in the company. Another thing we've done that's been super helpful is actually holding office hours. And so while we have an embedded model for a lot of the company, we also have sort of an escape valve where if you maybe are doing even an internal project and you just want research to give you some feedback, you can come in and say, hey, they drop a request in channel, fill out some information, and then we work with them on scheduling time or providing feedback asynchronously. And then I think the other thing that's been really helpful is having a perspective on how you share back information to the company. And I know that reasonable people disagree on this, so I don't want to offend anyone. One of the things that we've done that I think is really important for us and the way that we operate is, instead of trying to make everyone who joins Slack know that a research project happened at a certain time or that someone did it or know the title, we've actually taken it upon ourselves to say, here are a certain set of topics that we think are important for everyone in the company to have a high level understanding of. And then we've started to build out kind of one-pagers against them. And so if you are new to Slack, you can read these kind of 12 to 15 one-pagers and you're caught up on what we believe to be true about some of the most important topics. And this is very much like a wiki. So they have footnotes, they have charts, et cetera, where if you work on that team or you want to learn more, you can dive into those analyses or those research reports or whatever. But at a high level, this becomes a source of truth for a given topic. And so anyone at the company can just go there and say, oh, I'm interested in learning about NPS, or I'm interested in learning about Slack admins or Slack's brand. And we, as researchers, take it upon ourselves to keep that up to date and keep that synthesized across all of the work that we've done, so that people aren't having to try to figure out, oh, was this the most recent project, and which team did this, and was there a person, because part of our job is to actually make sure that the company has a clear sense of what's an important priority, what are the things that we already have answers to, what are questions that are going to be upcoming that we're going to tackle. And I think that kind of centralization has been really helpful in saying, here's where you go when you have a question. And if something is not answered, here are people to reach out to that will then address it for you, which has taken honestly quite a bit of work on our team, but it was a heavy upfront lift that has now started to pay dividends out.
If someone has, I'm not sure what the opposite of democratic research is, like a tyranny of research at their company, and they want to democratize the research practice, where do you start? Where do you think the starting point is for this process?
I'm trying not to give away too much of the UXRC talk right now, but this is a great question. I think one of the best things to do is to start by asking yourself, what are the skills and abilities that we have on our team? And of those, which are the ones that we should be exercising ourselves versus we are probably exercising because it is convenient or necessary right now, but not necessary over the longer term. And then I would think about what's kind of the cost, to benefit of starting to externalize those things. Interviewing, I think, for a lot of us who've been trained in qualitative methods is a pretty easy one because there are honestly probably many parts of your company that are doing interviewing. If nothing else, they're interviewing candidates to join the company, but they probably also have other types of interviews. And so I think starting with what are the things that are close to home that, if you're really trying to protect your customers that have the highest opportunity for someone to mess up and for someone to do sort of irreparable damage to the customer, to the company, et cetera, those are the things that you do. But there are probably a bunch of things that you're doing because either no one else has asked to do them, because you haven't stopped to think, oh, could I give this to a different role? Is there a partnership opportunity, et cetera? And I think, starting to prioritize that way has been really helpful. The other thing that I think we've been lucky to have buy-in from leadership about, that if you're in a tyrannical situation, maybe it's not true, but we've been encouraged to say no to certain things and to say no to things that are, probably not the best use of research time. One of the things I encourage people to think about really early in their career is when you start having these conversations with stakeholders and they say, oh, could you X, Y, or Z? You're like, well, I could, of course, I'm competent, but let's go assume that I do that process and I do that project and I learn that. What are you going to do? And the stakeholder says, oh, I just wanted to learn. It's not the best use of our time, not the best use of the customer time, et cetera. And so I think having that conversation very critically across the work that you're doing and saying what are the things that we're doing that are maybe not the most impactful? Are we playing the role of researcher and thinking about how to be, curious for the company and trying to understand where we're going and how to help the team get there and make those better decisions? Or are we product police and really just putting a check mark on things before they go out to the customer? And I think for some organizations, you work in a very heavily regulated or a very important environment that everything that gets released needs to be QA'd, both from a kind of an experience perspective as well as a functional perspective. And maybe, being product police to some extent is not terrible, but I think if that's your only job, it's a place for you to think about how can I sort of ladder up to being someone who's doing more strategic work and contributing in slightly different way. And I think those are actually the people who end up in this kind of tyrannical organization.
What does the map, so to speak, even look like? I'm not sure if you have good insight into this, but when we look at the map of research teams across the US and globally, how many teams are thinking in a way that's in any way similar to a democratic research practice? How popular is this line of thinking, working, way of working? Is democratizing research, is it becoming more popular? Is it gaining momentum? Is it not?
I think it's becoming more popular simply by virtue of the emails and tweets that I'm getting. But I think that there are probably a handful of companies I can think about that are doing it. And then I think that there are a lot of companies who are trying to figure out how to make it work. And I think there's definitely a roadmap for us moving forward. I have a workshop at the UXR conference really to help organizations kind of think about where they're at and where they want to go, because I think there are very pragmatic questions you can ask that there's not a clear playbook for everyone, but there are a set of playbooks that you can go through that will let you make progress on various levels. I think offhand, Stripe is an excellent example of a pretty democratized research practice. So Annie Steele runs the research team there. And when she joined, I think the mandate that came from Patrick Collison, the CEO, was like, anyone at Stripe can reach out to any customer. And so the majority of her practice in the first few years was, how do I protect our customers so that these conversations are meaningful value exchanges and they're not value extractive? And she's continued to grow that practice in a way that they regularly teach people how to do interview training, they build survey templates, et cetera. And like, I think they're in a really good place. I would have Annie on the show to talk more about that. I think there are other teams that have parts of their company that are democratized, but are not kind of in that same working relationship. And I think it's difficult because it's almost a chicken and egg problem from a hiring perspective, because you have to bring on kind of more centralized resources, which is something that if you look back at the last 10 years, like most research teams have moved away from and have fought against. They're saying, we don't want to be an internal agency. We don't want to be at the request of whoever. We want to be embedded as a part of the product development process. And I think what's hard about a lot of the conversations that happen around democratizing research is it feels like those things are at odds, when in fact, democratization is like a layer that exists. Like, you being embedded on a team actually makes you the perfect person to say, hey, a bunch of people on my team are trying to do these things that I am not the best person to spend time on. I want to leverage, a centralized team or a domain expert to help teach them how to go out and do that for themselves. And I think we're getting to a place where like Slack has embraced this model where, I have peers who are embedded on different parts of the product team and they take on their work, and then they often will hand people off to me and say, hey, Behzad has a guide for how to have a customer conversation, or Behzad will work with you through office hours. Like, now you can go forth and do that work on your own. And my team owns tools and process and whatnot, and we can enable them to do those things. It would be much harder if we were centralized and I had no visibility into what was going on with those product teams. But I think that there's a little bit of that kind of perspective shift that has to happen, where we've spent so much time trying to be embedded that now that we're embedded, some people look at this kind of centralized role and they're like, I don't want to go back to this agency model. I don't want to have to fight to be, valued and kind of thought of as like a partner. But I don't think that that's how it has to exist. But I do recognize the challenge of making that case without kind of having enough data points or anchors around understanding the mechanics of that.
And if the future of our practice is a democratized practice, what does that mean about the future of the modern researcher? Is it a researcher as a mentor, as a coach, something else? Who is that researcher who knows how to ensure that there is value being gleaned from every conversation?
That's a fantastic question that probably has a lot of answers. I think I love the coach analogy, and I talk about that with a lot of teams, that my job for the most part is being a player coach, and that a large part of my role is coaching people to do work themselves. And occasionally I will dive in and be a player on the team and help push things across the line. Mike Massimi, who works on my team and spoke at UXRC last year, has this great analogy that researchers are like elven rangers, where it's our job to move through the forest ahead and say, oh, okay, we need to prepare for this obstacle, or we need to be, we need to turn left because that's actually the wrong path. And I would hope that a lot of researchers are really excited about this idea that they can enable their partners to do some of the things that maybe historically were their job, because that frees them up to explore new and different types of research. I mean, I think even if you just look at some of the work that we do today, if I'm supposed to spend 25% of my time doing, let's say, usability for my product team, it's much more difficult for me to do any international work or to be out of the office, because I have a responsibility to my team to be doing that. And so if you think about even the more
Yeah.
immersive types of work, I don't want to be necessarily accountable for being the person to do that usability when I could train that to someone else, or when I could empower a group of people to take that on. Because then I'm free to do all of these other things and get more creative and to really push what research can be. And I think that hopefully is a lot more exciting for people than just doing the things that we've historically been expected to do. And so I see just like a wide world out there of exciting things for us to do and ways to contribute when we are focusing on the things that we are uniquely qualified for.
Yeah. I just want to remind people watching that we are taking questions, and if you have anything to ask Bezod, when it comes to democratizing research, I think one of the biggest experts out there right now, please do. I have one more question for you, which is kind of moving away from this topic. I'm asking everyone I'm speaking to recently this question: who belongs in our field? Who belongs in the research realm? And maybe that does have a lot to do with democratizing research, because I think those two topics are tied. It's always so fascinating to speak to people like yourself and always hear a different story about where people came from, how people got to be doing what they're doing. And I think also people feel like imposters to this field, or they're not quite sure they should enter it. So who does belong in a world where democratizing research might be the future of research?
I would like to think anyone is welcome. I recognize that that's probably not true in a lot of ways. There are certain prerequisites that I think people look for in job hirings and whatnot, but I do really believe that like curiosity is something that is very core to being humans. And insofar as researchers are curious professionally, like any human can be a researcher if they, want. And I'm very biased because I don't have a PhD and I don't have the same kind of academic training or pedigree. And I think I learned a lot more in the process of doing. And I think that's very much in the spirit of sort of the functional expertise that I grew up with academically, and understanding that credentials have, I don't want to call them arbitrary value, but have certain values that are, embedded within them, just like all artifacts have their own beliefs embedded in them. And so I think that, there are thankfully lots of resources available to people to learn how to thoughtfully and critically engage with people, to understand their perspectives, their behaviors, their activities. And I would love to see a more inclusive and broader field, because I think our practice is still very young in the way that it's been kind of formalized and codified. And I think about a lot of the people that I'm learning from right now. I think about Viviane Castillo and people like Alba, who are bringing in new perspectives to what I'm doing. And I think that there's just like so much room for us to grow that I don't want to have a predefined idea of who should be a researcher, because I think by all accounts, it would have been very difficult to think that I was going to end up here. And I think that that's great, because there's probably lots of other people who are going to end up in this field also sort of by accident. I mean, Viviane was a therapist. Like Matt worked at NPR and worked in strategy. Like people are just coming because they have this desire to understand and help humans in this world. And, in that regard, like that should be something all of us strive for. So everyone, maybe a cop out.
No, thank you so much. We do have to bring this to an end, although I feel like we could talk for a long time.
No.
Before we do finish, if people want to reach out to you, why would they do that? What can they reach out for you for, and how can they find you?
Great question. You can reach out about anything. may take me a few days to respond, but I try to be reasonably diligent. I'm super passionate about helping people who are early in their career get up and running with research. I was able to work with actually Annie and my current manager, Christina Janzer, when we were all at Facebook on a junior research training program that I am like very, very proud of, and has continued to like grow and cultivate great talent. So people who are early in their career that want to talk, people who are trying to democratize their practice and want to understand that, very down to have all of those conversations. Twitter is probably the best public way to get a hold of me. It's just my name with an underscore halfway through, so BEH_ZOD. And there's links to like websites and other stuff there. But yeah, happy to talk, and would love to hear from some of you.
Awesome. Who's the Bezod on Twitter without the underscore?
I don't know, and it's really sad because I've been on Twitter for a really long time. I think I've been on Twitter probably since 2007, and I used to have my full name, and I lost that account. But I've been lobbying for like 5 years to get my actual name, and then I gave up, and it was easy to grab, my name with an underscore.
Yeah. Oh well. Well, listen, thank you again so much for joining today in this third UXR conversation. If you want to join next time as well, then this is my email, and I am at noamseg on the Twitter. And we are going to be back next week with some marvelous guests, which we shall announce later on. So have a happy Easter or Passover, and stay healthy and safe, and see you next time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was great.
It was a pleasure. Bye for now, everyone.
Bye.